I now give the floor to the representative of Nicaragua to introduce the statement of his minister or her minister.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, it is an honor to present the pre-recorded statement of Comrade Denis Moncada Colindres, Minister of Foreign Affairs, conveying the message of the government of reconciliation and national unity of the Republic of Nicaragua at this General Assembly. Many thanks indeed. Your Excellency, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellency Wolfgang Bosquier, President of the 75th session of the General Assembly, representatives of Member States. Please allow me to convey to you the brotherly greetings of the people of Nicaragua of President Commander Daniel Ortega Saavedra and Vice President Rosario Murillo. They bring to you a message of peace, health and prosperity for the peoples and governments that form the United Nations organization. We are meeting in exceptional times, sparked by the pandemic, beleaguering humankind. We meet to reiterate our solidarity with and condolences for the families across the world that are suffering the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has meant that humanity is now hanging by a thread and has made patently clear existing crises which were more latent: poverty, hunger, inequity, malnutrition, unemployment, climate change. And all of these are crises that result from an unfair criminal economic system which does a great injustice to human beings. Mr. President, we are marking the 75th birthday of our organization, and humankind continues to call for peace, justice, security, and a comprehensive response to be provided by the United Nations system to the challenges they're facing for the benefit of humankind as a whole. We must, as a matter of urgency, reshape the United Nations organization as was proposed on behalf of Nicaragua by the Nicaraguan priest Miguel de Escoto when he was the president of this General Assembly in the year 2008. We here express our hope and commitment to this transformation which is necessary if we are to reshape the United Nations and make it more democratic along with its subsidiary bodies. Such reforms are vital so that the organization can benefit its people and not hegemonic powers. We are convinced that as people we are moving forward with hope and dynamism to build a new global order based on justice, equity, multilateralism, to guarantee international peace and security and indeed the common good of all, and this in full harmony with the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. We are entering the last decade of action to fulfill Agenda 2030 and to succeed with the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have 1 decade left to reach these goals, and to reach these goals we must pool our efforts. We must pool our efforts so that we have a true global partnerships which can counter the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and indeed the effects of other pandemics which a number of hegemonic powers impose upon us to the detriment of international peace and security, the sovereignty, territorial integrity of states and the self-determination of peoples. Nicaragua will continue to foster a culture of peace, peaceful coexistence between brother countries that form the United Nations organization. We will continue to provide stability to Central America, as well as peace and security at a regional level. We issue an appeal to all to continue with the global efforts to ensure safe, orderly and regular migration. The challenges brought before us by the pandemic are indeed very complex. However, we cannot discard the existential threat of climate change. It lies latent as a consequence of savage capitalism. it is of paramount importance to ensure the survival of the very human species, as well as the life and rights of Mother Earth. We are a peace-loving country, and as such, we as Nicaragua champions general and complete disarmament, and we favour the total elimination of nuclear weapons. The illegal, unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States on peoples of the world must immediately lift to guarantee stability, peace, and development of all families. We reject and condemn repeated attacks waged in a ceaseless and cruel war, a war waged against our people, against those of Venezuela and Cuba. This forms part of a pattern, an order, and a model designed to uphold external interests. Their policies are interventionist and allow empires to simply look after their own interests, intervene in the domestic affairs of others to protect themselves and harm others. There is a brutal political, economic and commercial blockade imposed on the Brother Republic of Cuba. In that regard, we reaffirm our unwavering solidarity with Comandante Fidel Castro, with the Chief of the Armed Forces, Raúl Castro, and we reaffirm our solidarity with Díaz-Canel too. We reaffirm our unequivocal support for the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This country is suffering from a cowardly series of attacks waged against it by the North American Empire. We unequivocally reaffirm our defense of the sovereignty and the sovereignty of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We reaffirm our support for the legitimate Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro. We support the legacy of Hugo Chavez. We would say here from this high rostrum that Nicolás Maduro continues to champion the interests of the Venezuelan people. This interference of empires in the affairs of others is an obstacle to the eradication of poverty and hinders progress towards sustainable development. As we stand in the midst of a pandemic, these measures are becoming crimes against humanity, crimes committed by those that impose such measures. The United Nations must focus its work on the well-being of human peoples. Nicaragua rejects the politicization of the United Nations system, a politicization championed primarily by the government of the United States. This government attempts to subject the systems of the United Nations to its own whims and to punish countries that don't yield to their interests. The Office of the High Commissioner for the Human Rights is not fair in terms of its work in its country. It provides oral updates and reports on our country, but politicizes the content thereof intentionally. Moreover, the reports they table are the result of deficient methodological processes. They draw sources simply from opposition forces in Nicaragua and therefore compile information which comes solely from NGOs and media directly linked to the failed coup of 2018. We here call upon these bodies to remember that the world that created the United Nations 75 years ago to guarantee human dignity, security, the peaceful coexistence of peoples and life, ushered in this organization to uphold the international order, and the organization promised to uphold the principles in its charter. But now let us state that all perspectives and all rights must be taken into account. Let us strengthen dialogue and peace in a world which is in such dire need of harmony and of its conflict, any conflict indeed, to be peacefully resolved. Mr. President, Nicaragua calls for the decolonization of the continent. We must see the independence of Puerto Rico, and we must see the Islands, the Malvinas, have their sovereignty returned to the Republic of Argentina. We call for a two-state solution, the state of Israel and the state of Palestine. These states must exist in peace and harmony with East Jerusalem as their border, in accordance with 1967 borders as enshrined in relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council of the United Nations Organization. We state here that we are unshakable in our will to defend the noble cause of the Sahrawi people. We support their desire for self-determination and their desire to express their wishes as a sovereign nation. Our government of reconciliation and national unity expresses its unshakable support for the cause of the Syrian people in their fight. We defend their unity and we support them as they fight against foreign involvement and international terrorism. We hail our brotherly people of Iran and we are strengthening our bilateral relationship with them in all fields in defense of peace, sovereignty and peaceful coexistence. We condemn the political attacks, indeed the hegemonic political attacks waged by the North American government, which jeopardize the peaceful solution of conflicts, and we condemn their relations with the Russian Federation. And where DPRK is concerned, we must always defend the principle of dialogue, cooperation, and we condemn the use of force and the threat of use of force. These are principles of the United Nations which must be upheld between the United States, Russia, and the DPRK. Heads of State delegation, today our commitment, one that we must uphold without delay, is to strengthen the foundations of multilateralism. We must strengthen international law and the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. Nicaragua believes that it is only together, standing shoulder to shoulder with love, solidarity and working together without egotism, that we can overcome the major challenges facing humankind. Nicaragua expresses its staunch support for the theme that we're dealing with at this 75th session, the future we want, the United Nations we need, reaffirming our collective commitment to multilateralism. The pandemic affects all countries, and this pandemic has laid bare the need to create a new international economic order based on inclusion, equity and justice. This new order must prioritize health as a universal right of humankind. We ask that resources allocated to war be made available for life and peace. In the face of this pandemic, it has become vital for the very survival of humankind to enforce the principle of universality so that Taiwan may participate in the relevant meetings of the United Nations system. Mr. President, heads of delegation, together we must build a United Nations organization which serves humankind. We must build a better world, and indeed that is possible. This is what our peoples, all of our peoples, are rightly calling for. Many thanks, Mr. President. On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nicaragua for the statement that he has just provided.